Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Connecting the Dots, a podcast series hosted by 49 Marketing. I'm Neil Robertson, and joining me on today's podcast is Rachel Barker, a self-employed senior copywriter and brand consultant from Bristol. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Rachel is here to talk about how to write copy that connects with your clients. So, Rachel, let's jump right in. So, I always start by asking the guests to tell me about their life and background. So, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. I know. I love hearing about how people got into copywriting too, because I think increasingly they're coming from, lots of different routes. I've spoken to a few people who've left education recently, or people come from journalism and marketing. I'm probably a bit different from most copywriters. A lot of people you speak to who write now, they love writing as a kid. They're like just being curled up with a book or, escaping into a fiction world. And that wasn't me at all. I was not particularly into stories or writing or reading as a child. I mean, I do read now, obviously. But yeah, put me in a pub quiz and don't ask me anything about Jane Austen. That is not my favorite round. But what I did love was language and communication and linguistics. I loved foreign languages at school. So at uni, I did French, German, Spanish and Dutch, and would have done more if I could fit them in. But I just liked the mechanics of language and how to translate a message, getting something across in different words. Although actually, even early on, I found out that, like in an academic sense, when you're doing a translating module, I would always get marked down because they're after a literal translation, and I'd always want to paraphrase it. You wouldn't say that in real life, so I'd make it sound better. And I guess that's still what I do now, is trying to get away from anything that sounds stilted or contrived, or unnatural. So left uni, obviously couldn't go into translating because I was rubbish at that, and didn't want to teach. And then you think, okay, so what am I going to do now with all these languages? So moved to Australia.
Well,
where a degree in European languages is less than useless, and your ability to lead a business meeting in Spanish is not valued at all. But it's a fabulous place to live and work. And I got a job as a marketing assistant in a brilliant company in financial services. They're an investment manager, and I worked my way up there within marketing and covered brand strategy, messaging, and copywriting, and really enjoyed the copywriting and the messaging side. So we'd write lots of pitch decks and presentations, and it was, understanding the corporate message and flowing that down to the investment teams, making everything sound as compelling as we could, even in a quite a restricted regulatory environment. But a great exposure to a lot of marketing and sales. Went back to uni remotely around that time. I did some postgrad studies at the University of Canberra in marketing communication, which took me into like biopsychology and consumer behavior and all that great sales stuff, which I loved. And it just developed my love of communication really as a part of marketing. And I could see that was where I wanted to take it. And while I enjoyed writing about inflation and interest rates every week, I thought, I could probably branch out into different industries here and explore how other companies approach their messaging and how they approach their copy. So chatted to a graphic designer who we work with at work, and he said, well, do you want to have a go at some of my freelance projects? Come in as a copywriter and write for some different companies, so smaller companies, completely different sectors. And that was just such a great opportunity because I had, the backing of a full-time job that I was still in, and then evenings and weekends, spare time. I could write on the side and sort of build those skills for other companies. And so that was 2010 when I set up Real Communication and I was writing for different clients on the side. So then fast forward 2015, we moved back to the UK and I left the corporate world and sort of carried on my business over here. And I sort of had to start it a bit from scratch. I brought some Australian clients with me, but the time difference is a killer when you're doing very late night, or might suit but very late night or very early morning Zoom calls. You're like, oh. So yeah, started to build my client base here in Southwest, and I'm still here, still doing the same thing.
You're still standing 14 years
Still
later.
standing.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so.
I saw the post the other day. I was so impressed by that. But so just to clarify one important detail, if Pride and Prejudice comes up in a pub quiz, you're not going to be massively okay with it. You're not going to be the best person to go to for that.
I'm not. I hate to admit that. And people always look to me, they say, oh, you're the words person, you're the writing person. Yeah, no, give me sport or music and I'm much more comfortable than literature. Yeah. I read a lot now, but there's a lot I've missed out over time that's still on my bookshelf, needs reading.
Yeah, well, same here. I've actually got it behind me in the cabinet here, and I haven't read it since I haven't read it since I had to at university, actually.
All right.
Because I studied English literature at university. I don't know whether because it's forced on you, you almost rebel against it once you don't have to do it.
That's right. Yeah, I had to do a lot of French and German literature, and that's another level again. But yeah, much preferred the contemporary language stuff and the linguistics, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, my mum's a French teacher, so I can kind of empathize with some of your struggles there. She said it was very intense when she was studying. So you've touched on it quite a lot there, but I just want to kind of keep it going and expand on it a bit more. What's your journey been like since you went freelance? When you look back on the last 14 years, how do you evaluate them, and what are some of the biggest learnings you've taken from them?
Yeah, biggest learning. I've loved it. I love copywriting. I wouldn't want to do anything else. Again, a lot of copywriters say that they like the storytelling or the creativity side, but it depends what type of copy you write. But that blend of like language, communication, psychology, I just love it. It really suits me. I recommend it. I mean, in terms of the business journey, absolutely, there's been ups and downs over 14 years. I think having the confidence to pitch and price has always been the hardest thing, and particularly in the early days. I look back and I think how tentative I was when you haven't got that confidence in presenting yourself. I suppose that was definitely the hardest. And in terms of workload, like gosh, the peaks and troughs are crazy, as I'm sure you know, and most freelancers go through this. For me, actually, the pandemic was fine. I was working with some big companies at the time who hardly seemed to be affected. They just carried on. They didn't panic. Marketing continued. So 2020, 21 were fine. But then 22 for me, between January and June, really, they were really quiet. And you just get to the point where you think, this is tricky. What's going to happen next? And you make the most of the time, you update your website again, you sort of look at your messaging, you do a bit of strategic networking. And thankfully, as it often happens, it came good. And I got a couple of really big projects in the second half of 22. And actually it ended up being my best year ever, which was crazy by the end of, by April 23. But it's, you got to hang in there, haven't you? It's like, you just got to hold tight, and that's hard when you can see that you've had no income for a couple of months. But in terms of biggest learnings, the biggest one I always say is to copywriters is to remember the service that you're offering has the potential to grow somebody's business and to make them a lot of money. It's a really valuable offering. What we do, without a clear message and without good copy, you can't attract clients. You can't build a reputation. You can't, inspire your teams or raise your profile or share your story. You just can't. It's that important. Mm-hmm. And yet so many copywriters, particularly in the early days, they say, oh, I can save you time by doing the stuff you don't want to write. And I'm just like, no, don't devalue it like that. You are doing this because you have the skills that your client doesn't have. And at some point, you also then have the experience from working on loads of other projects to do a better job than they will do, and to write copy that sells. And I think it's so important that we remember that, and we're not just, it's not a time-saving activity. We can offer real value that could, potentially grow somebody's business considerably.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I think often when you're writing in a professional capacity, especially if you've gone to university as we have and studying the kinds of subjects we have, it's marrying the academic style of writing with a real world style of writing. So like, and it's real word style of writing could work both ways. No, so it's like, it's marrying up what people teach you at university or in college or in school
yeah,
with what actually sells in real life. And I think there can be a marriage of the two. A lot of people tell you to just completely scrap the academic style of writing, but I don't know. I look back at my academic life and I studied English and history at A level. I studied English literature, as I said, at university. And that does help, I think, when I'm writing long form content. I know to split things out into single sentence paragraphs really as much as possible.
yeah,
I use elements of, because I studied English language and literature at A level. So there are elements of that I apply, interrogatives, imperatives, pathetic fallacy I do sometimes apply as well, simile, metaphor, all that stuff. Um, but yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. And it's a difficult marriage a lot of the time, because in the past I would write more because I was coming out of university as an academic, and I really struggled then to think, well, hang on, your person who's reading this on the tube or when they're out and about isn't going to be thinking about this the same way I am. So I have to make sure that ultimately it is clear, not clever, is what I'm trying to say. But it's quite difficult when you come from an academic background, because your natural inclination is to try and be clever. I still
yeah.
have that problem to this day sometimes.
Yeah,
Um,
sure. You're trying to impress your tutor, whatever. I think all of those backgrounds give you a brilliant foundation for copywriting, and it's then just pinpointing where there might be a skills gap. So if you've come from, teaching English and history, or if you've come from journalism, and you're brilliant at, you might be brilliant at researching and doing case studies and telling stories and getting to the heart of the issue.
yeah,
What might be lacking is that marketing and sales knowledge about writing. Again, depends what sort of copy or content you're writing, but getting somebody to take action, writing persuasive copy. So sometimes it's just a case of figuring out, that's where I'm a bit lacking, and maybe investing in some study in that area to
yeah.
to boost your skills. But it's a fun field to learn, and there's always so much to learn, isn't there? There's always so much to still study. But I think, just valuing what you can offer, and also, having that confidence. Again, it's trickier in the early days, but when I think back to, I used to like ring up graphic designers to see if they wanted a freelance copywriter,
Yeah,
and I'd just be so hesitant. I would say, just wondering if you ever work with freelance copywriters, could you consider me? And I would do that totally differently now, and I'd recommend even new copywriters now, start the relationship on the right foot. You can say, I'm looking to collaborate with some good creative agencies on forthcoming projects. Can we have a chat, see if we'd be a good fit? Take the bull by the horns, and have that confidence that you're you're offering such a valuable service, and you don't need to be led by other agencies and just sort of fall in line with them. To take control of it a little bit more. I would, if I was doing it again, I would try to do that a bit more.
yeah. Well, yeah, and that's what I'm trying to do a bit more. I mean, I'm 2 years in at the moment, so obviously I'm learning a lot as I go along from people like you. And that graphic designer thing is a great idea, by the way. I've done that myself, and I've managed to get a couple of projects off the back of it, because I think they understand our industry a bit more, and they understand their own limitations, because there's a certain irony there, isn't there? Like, copywriters cannot design whatever anyone tells you. They cannot, generally speaking, design anything
Yeah,
that's worth
yeah,
looking at. They might claim they do because they go on Canva, but that's not the same. That's an insult to the graphic design
it
profession.
is. Yeah,
And likewise, graphic designers, or certainly the ones I've worked with, have always said, I'm not a very good writer, so you do the words, I'll do the pretty pictures. So
yeah. They're very different skill sets.
yeah. So I saw a LinkedIn post you published the other day, which highlighted some of the niche industries that you've written content for. So you had car washing sponges in there, you had patient information leaflets, you had, was it deodorant cans? You mentioned deodorant. Was it like the cans, the copy?
No, it was a natural deodorant, actually.
Okay, right.
Yeah, that was a recent project, and I loved working on that. That was really fun to work on, because it's a brand that's grown organically.
Yeah.
Sold in Boots, on Amazon, does really well. The reviews are amazing, and yet there was no core narrative to the brand. There was nothing. There was no if you didn't look at the reviews, there was no reason to buy it or believe in it, or there was no story behind it. And it turned out that actually it had a really strong, compelling USP, which is quite rare. It did stand out. It's different from other natural deodorants, and there were so many great reasons to buy that they just weren't talking about. And there was a brilliant founder story as well. The guy who runs the company now, he'd been looking for a natural deodorant because he had sensitive skin, and everything he tried was irritating his skin. He tried loads, and he came across this. And he tried it, and it worked, and he loved it so much he bought the company. So it's a fabulous story behind the brand, and it just didn't exist anywhere. It hadn't come out. So did a messaging and voice project for them, rewrote the packaging, and beyond that, the scope to redo their website in the future. So yeah, that was a really nice project to work on.
I mean, isn't it amazing when you dig into every brand, what stories you uncover? Every brand has a compelling story. I firmly believe that. There's never a brand I've worked with where I've thought, oh, this is a bit boring. Even for the driest subject matters, they've all started from something. And often with the driest subject matters, those companies have the most money, especially if it's big B2B applications, and they're worth millions and millions, and you think it just started from a basement or something. But it's incredible. That really is. I mean, actually on that point, what are some of the best projects you've worked on in that sense, where you've really enjoyed the story, you've immersed yourself in the story, and it's maybe been a bit of an outside of the box, or a local boy done good or local woman done good story? What are some of the projects that spring to mind for you?
Yeah, so that was a great one. I think the industry, the product, the service can vary, but it's when you're working with a team who really buy into the process. They really value what you can bring. They enjoy working with a copywriter. They enjoy uncovering the messaging that you go through in the process, and they properly invest in it, and they respect what you bring. A big project I worked on last year was for the Royal Docks in London, which is just fascinating. I learned so much. It's a massive regeneration, and writing their website, which is a big website, and learned a lot about the area, and learned a lot about the people and who's involved in it, and the residents who've lived in the Royal Docks for all their life, the different neighborhoods, and how they're bringing the industry in, and the history behind it. I mean, that was just fascinating to learn about, and then to bring that out in the copy. It's super, really lucky to work on projects like that, the big regeneration ones. I've done quite a lot of property work, but that's been a really good one.
Oh yeah, that's cool. No, I love things that talk about heritage and history, and things you just never would have thought would happen nowadays. Obviously I live in Liverpool, where you hear about, and I know we shouldn't really celebrate this, but I just find it fascinating. Things like the slave trade here, and all of the roots there, and you think, God, it's incredible that happened. It was about 200 years ago, I want to say 300 years ago. And you feel, and there was actually, I don't know if you heard this story. I'm going off on a massive tangent here, but this just got me thinking. So the world famous Penny Lane, where the Beatles fame, I actually live down the road from it. So that's pretty cool. But they were going to rename it because it was named after a slave master. I can't remember his exact name. I think his name was Samuel Penny or something like that. That might not be it, but it was a slave master anyway. And so people were trying to get the name changed. It's like, well, you can't change the name of a street just because of something that happened 200 or 300 years ago.
That's the legacy.
Legacy, and that's what I love about it. Yeah, so I'd love to do more projects like that. But that was just an aside for the viewers, in case you're remotely interested. So on your website, you talk about the importance of consistently high quality, compelling copy. So this is a big question, but what does high quality, compelling copy mean to you?
Firstly, that makes me want to review my website, because that is an incredibly boring statement to read on a website. Because I mean, to be honest, who's going to look for low quality copy? Thinking about it, that must be buried on a services page somewhere. So hopefully you've read a few benefits before you get to that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, good question. Big question. High quality, compelling copy to me means copy that works. So I want your copy to work. I want my client's copy to work. So to work, it needs to make a connection with the person reading it. So it has to be, engaging. They have to want to read it. So they have to. If you start with a website, for example, they have to want to read that first heading. It needs to draw them in and make them read the next line. That's the sole purpose of that heading. It needs to make them read on. So it has to be compelling. It's got to connect with them like instantly. And it's got to make them feel something. So whatever they've come to your website for, it needs to show empathy or reassurance or inspiration or something. It needs to spark a reaction. And it needs to do that quite quickly. And then it needs to provide your solution so that while they've been drawn in and they're still reading, you've presented what you can offer them. So once you've maybe empathized with their pain, or you've acknowledged where they want to go in the future or what they're dealing with, it needs to present what you can offer. It needs to answer their questions. It needs to help them overcome any barriers, so anything that might stop them from clicking through to the next page. It needs to give them proof that what you're doing works. It needs to give them an easy way to access it. Like, it has to work really hard. Your copy has to work so hard for it to work. But when it does, it's high quality and it's compelling.
Yeah.
So that's probably what I need to say on my website in a more succinct way. But yeah, that's to me is high quality, is if it works. It's got to work. There is no point. There's no point investing in copy that doesn't connect with your ideal client to the point where they want to get in touch with you and buy from you. It's got to work.
Yeah. One thing I really liked that you said there is it's got to answer questions, because I think that I don't want to say not enough copywriters, because I don't want to generalize like this. I don't know every copywriter in the world, but I don't tend to see that much copy that answers questions or that even poses questions. That's something I do quite a lot in my copy, which is pose a question to people. So when you're selling something to somebody, and I learned this on a sales training course, so whether or not this applies to copywriting or real life, I'm not sure. But one big question is, or two big questions really, what problems are you facing, and what are the consequences if you're not solving that problem right now?
Yeah,
But in a way,
absolutely.
that's what copywriting is. Like, you want to be able to ask people those questions in a roundabout way. But even if you, depending on the audience, you might want to ask it like that, almost verbatim.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want to try and already know the answer yourself to have the confidence to ask that question if you already know what the answer to, because the answer is because you've done your research,
Yeah.
who you're talking to, what their alternatives are, what your competitors are saying. So you go into it when they come on your website, you recognize what they've already read on somebody else's website, what their trigger point was to come onto your website. And yeah, what will happen if they don't take action now. If you know your clients that well,
Yeah.
then your copy stands a good chance of working, because you're speaking to them. You're on their level then.
Yeah. Exactly. You're not being disingenuous. You're not being salesy, but you are. But you're doing it in a very clever way. And
You're
that's
just showing that you know them, and so they come onto your website and think, yeah, I feel seen, I feel heard, this person knows me. And then you've connected, haven't you? And it's, I suppose you could say that's salesy because it's a sales technique, but if you've got something that they want, then that's the purpose of business, isn't it? You're providing what they want and you're just showing them why it's right for them.
Everyone will buy something if it changes their life in some way for the better. That's the way I look at it. Even British people, who notoriously hate America. I always find that American and international audiences are so easy to sell to compared to British people. Like, British people are notoriously
Interesting.
cynical when it comes to being sold to. Well, I think they are anyway. But
yeah, maybe. Yeah, more cautious.
So how much of your writing is formulaic and how much is spontaneous? So by this, I mean, do you follow specific tactics or frameworks? So, for example, you've got like the AIDA framework, the PASS framework, the F pattern. I don't know if you know about that one, or the before after bridge. I mean, how much of that do you consciously follow within your writing, and how much of it just kind of comes from your gut, for want of a better phrase? And what advice do you have for copywriters on this?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that's what you learn. When you learn anything about copywriting, you start with those formulas, and they generally cover the fundamentals of copywriting. So you have to know those elements to write anything effectively, even if you don't follow them exactly. I suppose you need to understand, PAS, pain, agitate, solution. You need to know, I suppose, why that would work in sales copy. I think in the real world, I think it's generally much more nuanced. So you wouldn't have such a structure. I can't remember the last time I would, structure some copy like that. Maybe it's one of those answers that you sort of need to know the rules to be able to break them in a way, or I suppose not just to break them, but like to develop them further. So if you think of PAS, pain, agitate, solution, I always thought that was a bit limited anyway. So at the very least, you would have, pain or problem, agitate, solution, outcome. So what's the outcome after you've presented your solution? And then proof. So you'd have pass op. I always thought of pass op rather than pass. I thought, well, that's, you need to expand on it a little bit. But then, you get to know, I suppose, with experience, that sometimes you don't want to focus on the pain or the problem. You want to focus more on the desire or the goal, or that future state, rather than a negative.
Yeah.
And so if you only know PAS, then you're going to come a bit unstuck there. I developed my own framework, actually, and I teach it, called a connection copywriting framework, which covers all the key elements for any copy or content project. And it's just more flexible than a strict formula. You can use it for any type of project, any type of company. And that goes beyond the words on a page. So it actually looks at how to connect with your client, how to connect with their clients, how to uncover all that information. But for the actual writing part, the copywriting part, what I include at the very least, for sales copy at least, so you need to understand the pain and, the goal, or that future state where they're trying to get to. You need to know the customer's awareness level. How aware are they of you, of the market, of their pain in the first place? Sometimes, they're not aware of that. How much education do they need? You need to know their mindset. What are they thinking? Are they nervous of anything? Are they switching from a competitor? And you need to know their barriers. So what would stop them from signing up? And I think those are the key areas. And I wouldn't always put them in a specific order, because it just depends on the project. But if you generally know the pain, the goal, the mindset, the barrier, the awareness, cover them all off, and you're generally going to, speak to most people who you want to sell to.
Yeah. Do you know one thing that you said there, which I think is spot on, is that you don't always need to sell the pain to people. So if using the deodorant as an example, why would you say to somebody, imagine that if you don't use this deodorant, you're going to stink, basically.
Well,
you're going to have terrible body odor. That you don't need to basically tell them this is the result if you don't do this. It's like, I know it's deodorant or it's shampoo or something where it's a bit more self-explanatory what the kind of challenges are. But then you're taking them on a journey. I think you use that phrase where it's like you're taking them on, or you're letting them imagine what the future could be like. So that's where, maybe with something more B2C like that, it kind of lends itself more to that. Whereas I feel like, and again, this might be a bit of a generalization, but with B2B copywriting, where there's maybe bigger budgets involved, it's a bit more drawn out, a little bit more red tape. You kind of do have to sell that pain a bit more to sort of say to them what, like I said at the start, what are the consequences if you're not solving this? So, really points there. It just depends. And that's like, that's the best way of explaining it. What's some, I mean, on that point, this might actually tie in with this next question that I've got here. What's some of the best advice you've been given or come across in respect to writing copy?
Yeah, good question. So just before I set up Real Communication, so back in Brisbane, I went to a book signing and a talk by an author in a little independent bookstore in a trendy part of the city. And the guy was called Mark Tredennick, and he was promoting, so he did a great talk, and he was promoting his book, his latest book, called The Little Black Book of Business Writing. I'm not sure it's, particularly well known, but I bought that, and he signed it, and he did the talk. And for me, that's just switched on all my light bulbs at the same time. It was instrumental in me setting up Real Communication how I did. So the book is basically about making corporate comms, corporate language more engaging. And one of the things I was facing at that time in my corporate job was that our comms sounded, well, they sounded like corporate comms. They were like dry, serious, like detached from the audience, same as any other professional services copy. We weren't unique in that at all. But there was no warmth or no attempt at human connection in that copy, because all our relationship building was face to face. And this is going back to sort of 2007 to 2010. So a lot of it took place on the golf course or in private dining rooms, and that was fine. But what was infuriating, that we'd obviously write copy at the same time. And, I'd take a report that I'd written, take it for approval. And I would always get the response, oh, who cares? Nobody's going to read it anyway. You've got to imagine that in like a breezy Aussie accent. But it was true, because what we were writing was really boring. I mean, even for people in the industry, even for people in the investment industry, it was boring. It was overcomplicated. It was trying too hard to sound professional. And it was really hard work reading what we'd written. And the response, I could never push back too much, because that was the industry. And I was a marketing assistant, and, you can't push back too much at that point. But the response was that, well, we are marketing to educated people, and this is what they expect. So this is the type of content that they expect from us. But one of the takeaways I got from the book was that, nobody wants to spend any longer than absolutely necessary reading marketing content from another business. And nobody will ever complain that something is too simple to understand. So sure, you're talking to educated people. These are really smart economists. The details are complex, and that's fine. You don't want to, oversimplify the details at all. But these people receive 400 emails a day. How refreshing would it be if yours is the one that is engaging and that they stop to read? What a connection that could build with your fund as a fund manager, that they've chosen to read your email, that's cut through to that extent, because they don't have to read every sentence 3 times because, they can't understand it.
Yeah.
Like most professional writing.
Yeah.
You're not dumbing it down. You're not oversimplifying it. Your intention is simply to know your reader and connect with them. And that has really stuck with me. And I've developed that further as my brand of connection copy. It's not, it's not conversational copy. It's definitely not B2C. Most of my work is B2B. It's not writing how you talk. It's not innocent smoothies. It's just prioritizing meaningful connection with your reader at every stage. And that started from hearing at the book talk, hearing Mark Chudnik talk about that. And I just thought, that is so right. Why are we not using our content to engage? Yes, we can use face-to-face meetings as well, but come on, your content can work much harder for you than that. That's that. So in terms of copywriting, that's my biggest advice, probably, that I've learned over the last few years.
Yeah, I love that.
Oh, and sorry, carry on.
No, what I was just going to say, what you said there about nobody is ever going to complain about something being too easy to understand. I absolutely love that, because you've got to remember, right, whatever title people might have or whatever line of work they're in, they are human beings at the end of the day. And like all human beings, if they're getting 400 emails a day, as you said, they're not going to have time to read it, especially people like that, I think, because, time is money to them, and they're very time poor. So the clearer you can make it, it goes back to that whole idea of being clear, not clever. And
absolutely,
when I started in B2B marketing, I thought that I had to sound very clever, because I was like, oh my God, these are people who've, gone to really good universities, or they're like MDs or CEOs of companies. They just want you to cut through the crap cake and just spell it out in plain English for them. So I absolutely love that. I might steal that if you don't mind. No one's ever going to complain about something you understand. Brilliant.
Yeah, nobody will. They're going to read it and think, oh yeah, I got something from that.
Yeah.
That was good. And it's on my level. You're still talking to them as you would in a business meeting.
Yeah.
But you're not overcomplicating it because it's in writing. So often we try to make it sound like writing, especially in that industry.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing I've learned in terms of running a copywriting business. And on similar lines, I think my biggest advice to copywriters, if you want to connect with your clients, or if you want to prove that connection is important to you, do your briefing session. I call it a strategy session. Your briefing call at the start of project, do it face to face or on Zoom or on the phone. Do not send your client a form to fill out, because what you want to make it easy for them. This is not their forte. This is why they're hiring a copywriter, so they don't know what information you need. Make it easy for them. You will also, if you send a form, you will very rarely get the information you need and all the research you need to do a good job on the copy. It just won't be able to expand on the questions. If you ask them, how do you want to come across, every single organization, guarantee, will say professional and friendly, which doesn't tell you anything about how to write for them. You just can't expand. Do it over Zoom, record it if you can, type your notes, write your notes, whatever, but you need to dig a bit deeper than just sending out 10 questions to make that connection with your client and with their clients too. I think that's really valuable.
I mean, well, on that point, so how important is building strong relationships with senior stakeholders, especially, and subject matter experts within a business? When you're crafting impactful copy, how important is all of that? Because I feel like that's an area that a lot of copywriters struggle with due to things like internal resistance, red tape, poor communication. So I'm intrigued to know what advice you'd give them in that area.
Yeah, it can be tricky, and it depends on the organization, but it can be. You need those decision makers on board. Firstly, so the resulting copy does work, because they're the ones who are often instrumental in setting the messaging, setting the vision, and that needs to flow down from the top. Also, you need to get them on board so they respect what you do and they value the process. It needs to align with their overall thoughts and plans for the business. So definitely important to get them on where possible. And actually, it's one of the reasons that I try, where possible, to work directly with clients. I don't work with many agencies. There are a couple of agencies I do, and we work really well as a team, so I still have access to those senior leaders. But if it's an agency who completely manages the relationship and just sends me a brief, I find that much harder. It's very hard to translate a voice, even to get the details of those key messages just from an agency. So generally, I will try to work with the client directly. I would suggest very early on, so in your initial discovery call, before you've signed a contract or anything's in writing, or before they've paid anything, ask who will be involved at their end, and suggest quite strongly that you do get the senior decision makers on board, and just explain why. So explain the depth that you're going to go into in terms of your messaging, and how you want to make sure it reflects their views, it reflects the company vision, and going into the future as well. Because I think that positions you as an expert. It shows that you're not just throwing a few words on the page. It shows that you're thinking about this more strategically. So I think set that expectation from the start. And equally at that point, if you discover that they are not going to include their senior leaders, at least at that point, to price in perhaps more amendments if it's going to need to go through several rounds of committee edits at their end. At least you can do that at that stage, and know what to expect in the future. But I think bring it up early on, explain why it's important to the process, that you want the copy to work, and for that to happen, we need to get that messaging spot on. And see what they say.
Yeah, I love that example you gave of, if they're not going to get senior leadership involved in the content creation or ideation process, that you then adjust your quote accordingly, because a lot of copywriters probably wouldn't think to do that.
You have to, and that's why you need to ask some of these really important questions in that discovery call. They're sort of what I call red flag questions that afterwards I can think, okay, this could be tricky. This might need extra time or extra resources or whatever. And then you price it in. So I think at that point, at that discovery call point, you need to ask a few key questions to get that information to be able to quote.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so once you've then gone through that whole process, you've written the copy, you published it, how do you evaluate the success of your copy? So what are some of the key metrics you'll focus on to, I guess, determine whether or not it's truly connected with your target audience?
Yeah, it's not always easy. And, connection is obviously it's intangible, and yet you need something to focus on. You need something to work towards right from the very start. And again, I think raising this question early on. So it's one of the first questions I always ask: what has triggered this project? So why are we doing it now? And what are you aiming towards? What's the goal? What is the purpose? What do you want to happen ideally once we finish? What would success look like to you once we've written this website? What would be a good result? And I think, again, it sets that expectation that you want it to work, that you're invested in the project. And ideally, then they've got an answer for you and you can connect to that purpose. They can connect to the purpose or the goal, what they're working towards. And they can then understand more. Because sometimes when you first ask it, they're not sure, but then they think, okay, yeah, let's set a goal. They're more interested in the process then because they can see the purpose. So I think it's a really important step for them to value the value that you offer, if you like. It shows that you're taking it seriously. So I had a discovery call last week with a company and I asked them straight up, what's your goal with this? And it was brilliant because he said, we want 10 new clients of this particular type of client over the next 6 months. Perfect.
Yeah.
So even though, of course, there's going to be other factors at play, it's not just down to the copy. It would depend on his networking and relationship building, all the rest of it. But we can roughly see, if it's made an impact. We can roughly measure something. The reality is that a lot of companies don't know. They're not sure. With messaging, so when I do a website, work on messaging strategy at the same time. Often a company will say, we just need a consistent story that we can use across all our internal, external comms. We don't have one.
Yeah.
Or they will say, it's been 5 years since we updated our website. It needs a refresh. It's out of date. And I'll say, do you have any analytics? What's working at the moment? Oh, no, we don't really. It's not a key selling tool. We just, we need to have an up-to-date website to refer people to. So, it's not as clear cut. Obviously, depends on the client and on the industry. You can you check a baseline on the Google Analytics to start with, and then you can look back at that after 3, 6, 12 months. Sometimes we'll monitor leads from the website. Who is getting in touch? Are people clicking on the buttons? Is it converting people? I think you have to be a bit pragmatic about it as well. As much as I would like proof from every single project that it has worked, sometimes that's not, you have to be a bit pragmatic about it and think, as long as you've posed the question at the start, you've shown you're taking a strategic approach, you try to guide them as much as you can towards a goal, and then you run with what you've got. But it's a constant, it's a tricky one. It's
a never-ending journey because people are inherently different and they'll always have different goals. We would all love that client who said, I want 10 types of these clients in the next 6 months. I think that's a copywriter's
brilliant.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And yet it's rare, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. But as you said there, as long as you do you carry out your due diligence and you ask the right questions, really that's all you can do. And you just keep pushing it and keep pushing it. Sometimes you have to just hold your hands up and say, listen, I led the horse to water, couldn't make it drink.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the internal projects, sometimes I rewrite policies and guidelines for bigger companies because they're written in very legal, hard to read language. So people are complying with them because they know they have to tick a box, but actually they're not reading them and they're not reflecting the overall tone of voice. So we rewrite them all. They sound loads better. They generally have make all their internal comms sound better. But at the end of the day, everyone is still just ticking that they've read the policy, which they did originally because they had to do, it was a compulsory exercise anyway. So, the HR and the marketing teams feel better because everything is much better presented and it's more engaging, it's more reflective of their brand. But tangibly, it's hard to measure that outcome, that result.
Yeah. So, Rachel, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. Honestly, the insights you've given have been amazing. I've got so many copywriters in my network as well, so I think they'll love this. If anybody wants to connect with you or ask you any follow-up questions, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Always happy to answer any follow-up questions. I had a lot of help when I started out with people who were very generous with their time. So I'm really happy to help if people have got questions. LinkedIn is a good place to find me, Rachel Barker, or my website, which is realcommunication.co.uk. I'm going to be sharing my connection copywriting framework a bit later on in the year, so check back then, which gives you a proven framework to run your copywriting business, connect with your clients, and connect with their clients. Even if you don't have a niche, it's a really nice way to present yourself and to find people who are a good fit for you. So check back then. Love to chat to any copywriters, and I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, no, that's been my pleasure. I'll put the links in the description as always. And remember, kids, clear, not clever.